Okay, so today we're going to be talking about The Sculptor's Funeral, a work by Willa Cather. So I know that in most cases to analyze a reading, the author's background isn't exactly significant. However, there are some things about Willa that I would like you to note and just sort of put in the back of your mind, because we're going to come back to those things later on some topics that I'd like to touch on in this PowerPoint. So the main things I want you to really remember about Willa is that she was born in a small town, and even after moving, she was raised in a small town. She's even very famous for writing about life on the plains and sort of small town life. But despite all that, despite living in a smaller area, she received a Pulitzer Prize for her writing, and she became very well known for her creations. So I just want you to kind of remember that, as it's got a bit of significance to this story. I know we've all read this story by now, so I'm not going to touch on this for long, but I will do a quick summary just to kind of refresh your mind on this work. The Sculptor's Funeral mainly is based around just what the title says, the funeral of a famous sculptor. So Harvey Merrick was born in a small town, and he was a bit of an outcast, an outsider, and he leaves this town to follow his goals. And he becomes a very well-known sculptor. And it's actually even said in the reading that the town is really only known for being the birthplace of Harvey. So that's how well-known he had become. And he has a student who he was teaching the arts, who accompanies his body. So you kind of get to see this small town that Harvey came from through an outsider's eyes, because this student is just shocked at what he sees and what he hears, and how these people think of Harvey when he thinks of Harvey as such an inspiration and such a talent, and such a nice, great person. So we get to see this small town through an outsider's eyes. Now, the main theme of this, if I were to summarize the main theme, I would probably say that this story is mostly about small town ideology and follower mentality, because everyone in this town really values the same sort of thing. They value jobs that require labor, like farm work and your typical small town jobs, and they don't like people who branch out of that. They don't like people who are different, who go against that. It's almost as if they look at you like you're weird and you're going against their way of life. And, Harvey even is talked about by several of the townspeople as being lazy, or it's almost as if they speak about Harvey like he is a disgrace to the town, even though the town is only known because of him. So obviously he is not a disgrace, but this sort of small-mindedness in the town makes them think this way. I think we see this in a lot of small towns. Sort of everyone knows everyone, and everyone is in each other's business. Everyone's judging you. And a lot of people feel like they have to follow the same path as the rest of the town in order to be accepted. But I think this story really focuses on what can happen if you branch out of that, you follow your own goals, and you're not exactly, afraid to be different. You're not afraid to stick out, because Harvey was the most successful out of this town because he did something for himself. He did something that meant a lot to him, despite other people's judgments. So I would say the main theme I get from this is just sort of not being afraid to break out of the norm. Some underlying themes that I saw in this work, they may not have been as straightforward, but if you really dig in and pay attention to the reading, I feel like I saw a bit of racial and class discrimination in here. So Henry was who I was speaking of earlier, who accompanied Harvey's body. And he was so shocked to see how the maid was being treated there. They also referred to her as a mulatto woman, speaking of her race as a mixed race female. And this wasn't really in a talking quote, this was more in the writing itself. So I do think this wasn't intentionally put there to show racism in the town. And that's a bit of an outdated, obviously an outdated and an inappropriate term now, but at that time when this work was written, it may not have been looked at as that way. But I think just the fact that her race was even put in there, even as a descriptor, possibly could show that the town might have a little bit of racial discrimination. I feel like most of the time small towns are behind, even now, when it comes to being open to other people. So again, a little bit of that no outsiders, no one different sort of mentality. And also, she was a maid, so she could have been getting some class discrimination going on. Her job may not have been looked at as important to others. She may not have made as much money as others. And I think because of her race and because of her job that she was holding, she was being discriminated against. So I feel like you could see that a little bit in this work too. And again, Henry, who was accompanying Harvey's body, who was not from this small town, who was looking at this from an outsider's point of view, was just shocked to see how they were treating her. So that may be normal in this town, but I think that goes back to our main theme of maybe breaking out of the norm to see what else is out there and to go with your own morals and not just follow other people's, because just because that was normal there doesn't mean that that's normal everywhere or that it should be. Another theme I think that you can kind of find in there is a religion theme. Jim Laird was a lawyer who was actually the only townsperson who spoke up for Harvey. And he said, quote, "You're a discriminating lot of Christians. You'll sit here and throw mud at Harvey Maverick, whose soul you couldn't dirty." Jim is saying these townspeople identify as Christians, and this religion is a big part of their town. However, Christianity is supposed to be a religion of love and acceptance, and it's clear in this case that they are not being accepting of people who are different than them. They're not being accepting of the maid, maybe due to her race, due to her class, possibly. And they're definitely not being accepting to Harvey. Even in death, they are talking poorly about him, possibly because he is just a bit different than them. He chose a different path than them. So they're not accepting these people who are different than them, although Christianity is a religion of acceptance. And Jim Laird sort of calls them out for this. So I think another theme that you could get if you really look into this story is kind of a religious discrimination or a bit of a hypocrisy theme, where Willa is showing how some people might identify themselves with a group, but not exactly follow the traits that group is supposed to have. like the loving traits or the caring traits or the accepting traits. It's more of just a judgmental group of people in this town here. Not speaking of Christians in general, but I'm just speaking of in this town, in this reading. So I think Willa is maybe telling us to look out of these towns, look out of these small groups, and really get the big picture of the world. I really think it's a big story of going against the grain, going against the norm, going with your own heart and your own feelings. And, you know, Harvey was a person who couldn't be hardened by this town. He wanted to accept people. He wanted to teach people. He wanted to create art, and he went with that. And for that, he seemed to be the happiest person that could have come out of this town, because he didn't just follow this mentality of fitting into this group, even though this group wasn't exactly being the nicest or the most supportive. So I want to look at a little bit of character representation and what each of these characters represent. So we're going to jump back into Jim Laird again, who we were just speaking on. This was the lawyer who stood up for Harvey. Jim Laird called himself a shrew lawyer, and he represents, to me, conforming to the pressures of the small town ideology. He's known in the town as having an alcohol problem. He's known as being a very unhappy, crude type of man. And Jim sort of stands up and he tells them, you know, how dare you sit here and judge Harvey, someone who is happier for leaving this town, someone who's more successful for leaving this town. And he sort of tells the townspeople he wished that he could have done that as well. And he didn't. And because of that, you know, maybe his descriptors of being an alcoholic are to show that conforming to something that you don't fit into could make you unhappy. So I think Jim Laird is here to represent what could happen if you don't go with what you want. What could happen if you do stay in that follower mentality? And on the flip side of that, Harvey Merrick is here to show you what can happen if you do break free of the societal norms, if you do follow your own wishes, your own aspirations, your own morals. You know, you're choosing how you want to treat people. You're choosing what career you want to go into. And you're not following the judgment of others just to fit in. So Harvey is really to show breaking free of those norms. Henry, I have a typo here that I need to fix. I apologize. It says Harvey again. What I meant was Henry being the artist student who is accompanying Harvey. He's an outside perspective. He's the view of this small town through an unbiased eye. And he's shocked throughout this whole reading. He's shocked at the way that people are talking about Harvey. He's shocked at the way that they saw him. He's shocked at the treatment of the maid. He's shocked at how just unhappy and negative this town is. And the people inside that town might not see that. So I think Henry is really to represent that, you know, although in small groups these things might be normalized, they're not normalized if you step out of that. So you really need to see the world through a bigger view. You need an outside perspective. You need to get yourself out of your comfort zone and see how others live their lives to be a more accepting person. Then we've got the townspeople, who to me represent the pressure of society and the push to conform and to go along with your peers and to go along with the norm and what others are doing instead of following your own goals or your own morals as well. Now, A bit of a correlation to some other things that we have read this semester. This sort of reminds me of Sylvia in The White Heron. So The White Heron, in a way, contains some themes of rebellion from the normal. Sylvia could be looked at as behind. She didn't have money. She wasn't having any interest in it. Now, I know that she was young in this story, but a lot of that reading kind of touches on how Sylvia isn't being set up for the right path for women. And the right path for women at this time was sort of finding a man, finding money. And Sylvia gets offered money. She could have given away the heron's location to this hunter, but instead she chooses to go against this. And it's probably a decision a lot of people wouldn't have made. They wouldn't have stuck to their morals. They would have stuck to wanting to conform. But just like Harvey in The Sculptor's Funeral, where he goes against the town, he's not thinking about money and he's not thinking about acceptance. He's thinking about what he wants. He goes against this town and he gets happiness from that and he gets success from that. And he also was portrayed as a more caring person. And Sylvia here is also being caring for, in this story, more for an animal and more for nature. But she's also caring about something other people may have put down as not important, like the maid in the story, and how she was being treated. Other people might treat the heron this way as not important. But Sylvia goes against this decision, and she does not tell the hunter where the bird is. And although that means she's going to stay in the same position with, no income or anything, and although that income could have helped her be more accepted, she doesn't take it, just like Harvey didn't take it. And I feel that they're better people for that. And here is a little works cited page to show you all where I got a lot of this information. So that is what I got out of The Sculptor's Funeral. I think it's really a big story of treating other people as how you want to treat them, going in a direction that you want to go in. And if there's a negativity around you that's pushing you to do something else, that's pushing you to treat people a way you don't want to, that's pushing you to take a career that you don't want to, it's really important to go against that. It's like I said again with the character representation. Do you want to be a Harvey or do you want to be a Jim Laird? That's what I really get out of this story. So I enjoyed reading it. I enjoyed researching it and diving a little deeper into it. And I hope you all enjoy this presentation. Thank you.